I never thought creatures from folklore could be real until one of them became the reason I'm still breathing today. What began as an ordinary solo backpacking adventure through the Smoky Mountains transformed into something that completely shattered my understanding of reality. I'm sharing this account not because I need validation or approval, but because the events that unfolded during those 5 days in the wilderness fundamentally altered who I am as a person. This is how I became hopelessly disoriented in one of America's most ancient mountain ranges, found myself being hunted by a deadly predator, and was ultimately rescued by something that every rational part of my mind insisted could not exist. Before I get into the details of what happened, I should probably explain a bit about who I am and why I was out there in the first place. I'm a high school biology teacher, 32 years old, and I've always considered myself to be a rational, scientifically minded person. I grew up in suburban Tennessee, but my parents were avid hikers and campers who instilled in me a deep love for the outdoors from a very early age. Some of my earliest memories involve weekend camping trips and day hikes through state parks. By the time I was in high school, I was regularly going on extended backpacking trips with youth groups and outdoor clubs. I completed my Wilderness First Responder certification when I was 19. I've hiked sections of the Appalachian Trail, explored countless state and national forests, and spent well over 100 nights sleeping in a tent in various wilderness areas across the Southeast. I'm telling you all this to establish that I'm not some inexperienced novice who panics at the first sign of difficulty. I know how to read topographical maps. I understand how to use a compass properly. I know how to purify water, build proper food hangs to avoid attracting bears, and recognize signs of changing weather patterns. I've dealt with challenging situations before, including getting caught in unexpected thunderstorms, encountering black bears, and navigating around fallen trees blocking established trails. I considered myself competent and prepared. That confidence, that certainty in my own abilities is part of what got me into trouble. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The whole thing started in late September when I made the decision to take a week off from my job as a high school biology teacher and spend some time alone in the mountains of eastern Tennessee. The timing was perfect because it was just after the start of the fall semester, when things at school had settled into a routine, but before the really intense grading periods began. I had been meticulously planning this excursion for nearly half a year, ever since the previous spring when I had looked at my calendar and realized I had accumulated enough vacation days to take a full week off. I spent countless lunch breaks during the school year poring over topographical maps of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the surrounding wilderness areas. I studied elevation profiles, water sources, and established trail systems. I read trip reports from other hikers who had completed similar routes. I purchased new maps with updated trail information and spent hours at home plotting out my intended route with colored markers, calculating daily mileage, and identifying potential campsites. I obsessively monitored long-range weather predictions for weeks in advance, checking multiple forecasting services and comparing their models. I wanted conditions to be as perfect as possible. The extended forecast for late September looked absolutely ideal, promising 4 solid days of clear skies with daytime temperatures in the mid-60s and nighttime lows only dropping into the 40s. No precipitation predicted. Light winds, basically perfect hiking weather. I assembled all my gear with the precision of someone who had done this many times before and understood exactly what was essential versus what was merely extra weight. I carefully packed my backpack, a 60-liter internal frame pack that I had owned for 6 years and trusted completely. Into it went my lightweight tent, a 2-person model that I could set up in under 5 minutes, even in challenging conditions. I packed my down sleeping bag, rated for 20 degrees Fahrenheit, more than adequate for the predicted nighttime temperatures. I included my sleeping pad, my camp pillow, a comprehensive first aid kit that I had personally assembled with everything from bandages and pain relievers to prescription antibiotics and an EpiPen. I brought my reliable water purification pump, having learned years ago never to trust water sources in the wilderness, no matter how clear and clean they appeared. I packed sufficient dehydrated meals to last me 5 full days with a comfortable margin of error, including my favorites like pad thai, chicken teriyaki, and beef stroganoff. I brought energy bars, trail mix, instant coffee packets, electrolyte powder, and even a few pieces of chocolate as morale boosters. I packed extra batteries for my headlamp and a backup flashlight. I brought waterproof matches and a reliable butane lighter. I included a small camp stove and fuel canister. I packed extra layers of clothing, including a warm fleece jacket, a waterproof shell, extra socks, and a lightweight pair of camp shoes to give my feet a break in the evenings. I also made sure to include my emergency satellite communicator, a device I had purchased 2 years earlier specifically for situations where cell phone coverage would be non-existent. It was a small, bright orange device about the size of a deck of cards that could send preset emergency messages and my GPS coordinates to a monitoring service that would then contact rescue authorities. The device had an annual subscription fee that I faithfully paid, even though I had never actually needed to activate it. I viewed it as essential insurance, the kind of thing you hope you never have to use, but are incredibly grateful to have when you need it. I also told several people about my plans, following proper backcountry safety protocols. I gave detailed information about my intended route to my best friend, Sarah, including the trailhead where I would be starting, my planned campsites for each night, and the expected date and approximate time I would be finishing. I told her that if she didn't hear from me by 6 o'clock on the evening of my expected return date, she should contact the park rangers and provide them with all the information I'd given her. I filed a backcountry camping permit with the Park Service, providing them with essentially the same information. I felt thoroughly prepared and confident. The opening day of my journey unfolded precisely according to my carefully constructed itinerary, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction as everything clicked into place exactly as I had planned. I arrived at the trailhead at 8:30 in the morning, after driving for just over 2 hours from my apartment. The parking area was nearly empty, except for 2 other vehicles, which wasn't surprising for a weekday in late September, after most families had returned to school routines. I took my time gearing up, adjusting my pack straps until the weight distribution felt perfect, double-checking that I had everything I needed easily accessible. The morning air was crisp and slightly cool, maybe in the low 50s, and I could see my breath forming small clouds when I exhaled. The sky above was a brilliant cloudless blue that promised a perfect day. I signed the trail register at the trailhead, noting the date, time, and my planned route, then took my first steps onto the established trail with a sense of excitement and anticipation I always felt at the beginning of a new adventure. The first several miles of trail passed through some of the most magnificent old-growth forest I had ever experienced. These were the kind of trees that had been growing for centuries, massive specimens that had somehow escaped the extensive logging operations that had cleared most of the Appalachian Mountains in the early 20th century. I walked among towering oaks with trunks so large that 3 people linking hands could barely encircle them. I passed beneath ancient hickories and tulip poplars that stretched upward toward the forest canopy 100 feet above my head. Shafts of morning sunlight filtered down through the layers of leaves, creating an almost cathedral-like atmosphere with pillars of golden light illuminating the forest floor. The trail itself was well maintained and clearly marked, with white painted blazes on trees at regular intervals to confirm I was following the correct route. The path wound its way through this magnificent forest, sometimes climbing gradually up ridgelines, sometimes descending into quiet hollows where small streams bubbled over rocks, worn smooth by countless years of flowing water. I covered approximately 14 miles during that first day, maintaining a comfortable pace that allowed me to enjoy my surroundings without exhausting myself. The temperature climbed into the upper 60s by afternoon, absolutely perfect hiking weather where I was warm enough to be comfortable but not so hot that I was dripping with sweat. I stopped several times to drink water and eat snacks, sitting on fallen logs or convenient rocks, while listening to the sounds of the forest around me. Birds sang from the canopy above, their calls echoing through the trees. I heard woodpeckers hammering against dead trees in search of insects. At one point, I heard what I was fairly certain was a pileated woodpecker, one of the largest woodpecker species in North America, its distinctive call carrying through the forest. I spotted several deer during the day, including one particularly large buck with an impressive rack of antlers, who watched me pass from a distance of perhaps 50 yards before bounding away through the underbrush. I saw countless squirrels gathering acorns and other nuts in preparation for the coming winter, their cheeks bulging comically as they stuffed their mouths full. I observed a small flock of wild turkeys scratching through the leaf litter in search of food, the hens keeping a watchful eye on their nearly grown poults. The forest felt alive and vibrant in a way that always filled me with joy. By late afternoon, I reached the campsite I had identified on my maps during my planning phase. It was located beside a narrow creek that ran clear and cold, probably fed by springs higher up in the mountains. The location was perfect, with a relatively flat area where I could pitch my tent, a natural fire ring made from stones where previous campers had built fires, and easy access to water. The surrounding trees provided shelter from wind while still allowing enough open sky that I would be able to see the stars once darkness fell. I established my camp methodically, following the routine I had developed over years of backcountry camping. First, I identified the spot where I would pitch my tent, making sure it was level and free from rocks or roots that would make sleeping uncomfortable. I set up my tent, staking it down securely even though no wind was predicted, because I had learned to never trust weather forecasts completely. Then I hung my food bag from a high branch at a considerable distance from my tent, using proper bear bag techniques to ensure no animals would be able to access my food during the night. I filtered several liters of water from the creek, filling all my water bottles and my hydration bladder. I prepared a simple dinner of freeze-dried beef stroganoff, adding boiling water to the package, and waiting the required 7 minutes while the food rehydrated. I ate sitting on a log near the creek, watching the light fade from the forest as the sun set somewhere beyond the mountains to the west. The stroganoff was surprisingly good, or maybe I was just hungry enough that anything would have tasted good. Either way, I scraped the package clean and felt satisfied and content. As darkness fully descended and the first stars began appearing in the narrow strip of sky visible above the creek valley, I felt completely at peace with the world. This was exactly what I had needed, this escape from the constant demands and stresses of modern life. Out here, there were no email notifications demanding immediate responses, no students needing help with assignments, no meetings or obligations. Out here, it was just me and the natural world, existing in perfect harmony. I crawled into my tent around 9 o'clock, not because I was particularly tired, but because there wasn't much else to do once darkness fell. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the peaceful murmur of the creek flowing past just a few yards away. I could hear the wind moving gently through the trees above me. In the distance, I heard what might have been an owl calling. I felt completely in control of the situation, completely confident that everything would continue going according to my carefully laid plans. I fell asleep feeling grateful and happy, with no premonition whatsoever of what was coming. The second day began with equal promise and optimism, and if I had known what was coming, I would have savored those peaceful morning hours even more than I did. I emerged from my tent as dawn was breaking. unzipping the tent fly to see the forest gradually becoming visible as darkness retreated. The air was cool and fresh, probably in the mid-40s, and a light mist hung over the creek, creating an ethereal atmosphere that looked like something from a fantasy painting. I performed my morning routine, taking care of personal needs at an appropriate distance from the water source, then returning to my campsite to brew a strong cup of instant coffee using my small camp stove. The coffee was nothing fancy, just instant crystals mixed with hot water, but out there in the wilderness, it tasted absolutely perfect. I stood beside the creek, sipping my coffee and watching the mist gradually dissipate as the temperature warmed and sunlight began filtering down through the trees. A few early birds were already active, their morning songs creating a natural symphony. I saw a gray squirrel venture out onto a branch above me, pausing to groom itself before continuing about its business. Everything felt right with the world. I took my time breaking down my campsite, folding my tent carefully and packing everything away in its proper place in my backpack. Organization was important, especially when you were carrying everything you needed on your back. I wanted to be able to find anything I might need quickly without having to dig through a chaotic mess. I filtered 1 more liter of water from the creek to top off my supplies, performed a final check of the area to make sure I wasn't leaving anything behind or leaving any trace of my presence beyond the natural wear on the established campsite, then shouldered my pack and started hiking by 7:15 in the morning, exactly on schedule according to my itinerary. My objective for that day was ambitious but achievable. I planned to reach a spectacular viewpoint I had identified on my maps, a rocky outcropping located approximately 17 miles from my starting point that morning. According to the trip reports I had read, this viewpoint offered one of the best panoramic vistas in the entire region, with views extending for dozens of miles in every direction on clear days. I intended to spend the night at a campsite near that viewpoint before beginning my return journey on the 3rd day. The route would take me along a ridgeline for much of the day, gaining and losing elevation multiple times as I followed the contours of the mountains. It would be challenging, but I was confident in my ability to complete it. The established trail was clearly marked with white blazes painted on trees at regular intervals, and I was maintaining an excellent pace, covering ground efficiently without rushing or exhausting myself. The morning atmosphere was refreshingly cool and invigorating, absolutely perfect conditions for covering significant distance without overheating. I found a comfortable rhythm, my legs carrying me steadily forward while my mind wandered freely. This was one of the aspects of solo hiking that I loved most, the way it allowed your thoughts to drift and meander without the constant interruptions and demands of normal life. I could think about whatever I wanted or think about nothing at all, just existing in the moment and moving through the forest. I passed through groves of towering tulip poplars with their distinctive squared-off leaves and ancient hemlocks, their massive trunks speaking to centuries of undisturbed growth. Some of these hemlocks were clearly struggling with woolly adelgid infestations, an invasive insect pest that had been devastating hemlock populations throughout the Appalachians for years. I could see the telltale signs, the thinning crowns, and the whitish woolly egg sacs attached to the needles. As a biology teacher, I found it heartbreaking to see these magnificent trees slowly dying, but I also understood that such changes were part of natural processes, even if accelerated by human-introduced species. The forest was alive with activity that morning. Birdsong filled the air, a complex chorus of different species, all broadcasting their territorial claims or searching for mates. I spotted several species I could identify by their calls, even without seeing them, including chickadees, titmice, and nuthatches. I heard the distinctive tapping of woodpeckers echoing through the forest. At one point, I observed a wild turkey hen with several poults, the young birds nearly full-grown, but still following their mother closely as they foraged through the leaf litter searching for insects and seeds. The hen spotted me and issued a sharp alarm call, sending her poults scurrying for cover. I froze and watched them until they disappeared into the underbrush, amused by their panic. Everything about the experience felt harmonious and right. Around noon, I reached a rocky outcropping that offered an expansive panorama of the surrounding mountain ranges, and I decided this was the perfect spot to stop for lunch and rest my legs. The view was absolutely breathtaking in a way that photographs could never adequately capture. I could see ridge after ridge extending toward the horizon, each one slightly hazier than the last, as they receded into the atmospheric distance, creating layers of blue and purple that seemed to go on forever into the hazy distance. The Smoky Mountains get their name from the perpetual haze that hangs over them, a combination of water vapor and volatile organic compounds released by all the vegetation. On a clear day like this, that haze created a beautiful effect, each successive ridge appearing more faded and ethereal than the one before it. I removed my camera from my pack and captured several photographs, though I knew from experience that images never really did justice to the actual experience of standing in a place like this. I tried different angles and compositions, attempting to capture not just what I was seeing, but what I was feeling. After I was satisfied with my photos, I settled down onto a flat section of rock to eat my lunch and simply enjoy being exactly where I was. I had packed a bagel with peanut butter and some dried fruit, simple provisions, but entirely adequate for my needs. The bagel had gotten somewhat compressed and slightly stale during its time in my pack, but the peanut butter made it palatable enough. I ate slowly, taking my time and chewing thoroughly while absorbing the magnificent scenery laid out before me. The dried apricots and cranberries I had brought along for added nutrition were sweet and chewy, providing a nice contrast to the heavy bagel. I drank deeply from my water bottle, feeling the cool liquid soothe my throat, which had become slightly dry from breathing heavily during the morning's exertion. After eating, I retrieved my map to verify my location and progress. I spread the topographical map out on the rock beside me, weighing down the corners with small stones so the slight breeze wouldn't blow it away. I identified several distinctive peaks I could see from my vantage point and matched them to features on the map. I traced the route I had followed that morning with my finger, calculating distances and elevations. Based on my calculations and the landmarks I could identify with confidence, I was moving even faster than I had anticipated. At this rate, I would definitely reach my target destination with several hours of daylight remaining, which would give me plenty of time to establish my camp, filter water, and perhaps even explore the area around the viewpoint before darkness fell. I felt a sense of satisfaction and pride in my physical conditioning and navigational skills. Everything was going exactly according to plan, perhaps even better than planned. I lingered at that outcropping for close to 45 minutes, which in retrospect was time I probably should have used more productively. But in the moment, it seemed perfectly reasonable to simply exist and appreciate the raw beauty of these ancient mountains. This was precisely why I loved immersing myself in wilderness settings, being completely removed from email and social media and traffic congestion and the constant bombardment of information and demands that characterized modern existence. Out here in this remote place, there existed only me and the natural world. Out here, I felt genuinely and completely alive in a way that daily life never provided. Out here, I could hear my own thoughts without constant interruption. Out here, I could breathe deeply and feel my body working exactly as it was designed to work. I watched a red-tailed hawk circling lazily on thermal currents somewhere out over the valley below me, riding the rising columns of warm air without expending any energy, its wings outstretched and motionless as it soared. I watched clouds casting moving shadows across distant ridges, I felt the sun warm on my face and arms. I felt completely content and at peace. Eventually, I knew I needed to get moving again if I wanted to reach my intended destination before dark. I carefully packed away my lunch refuse, making sure not to leave even the smallest piece of trash behind. Leave no trace principles were important to me, especially in heavily used wilderness areas like this. I took one final extended look at the spectacular view spread out before me, committing the sight to memory, then returned to where the trail continued into the forest. I shouldered my pack, adjusted the hip belt and shoulder straps to redistribute the weight comfortably, and started walking again. That was the moment, though I didn't realize it at the time, when everything began to unravel. The trail continued along the ridge for a while after I left the viewpoint, winding through dense stands of mountain laurel and occasional outcroppings of exposed rock. The white blazes that marked the established trail continued to appear at regular intervals, and I followed them without concern or worry. But at some point during that afternoon, something went wrong. Looking back from my current perspective, I understand that I must have made a wrong decision at some junction, perhaps where the path divided or where storm damage had obscured the proper route. There were several places where fallen trees had blocked the established trail, forcing me to walk around the obstacles. There were several places where the path seemed to split, with both options looking equally well traveled. In these situations, I made what seemed like reasonable decisions at the time, choosing routes that appeared to be more heavily used or that seemed to be heading in the correct general direction. But clearly at some point, probably without even realizing a decision was being made, I had made a fatally flawed choice and left the established trail for some less maintained path, or possibly even just a game trail created by deer moving through the forest. The problem, as I would later realize, is that in dense forest, where every direction looks essentially the same, it's remarkably easy to become disoriented without even realizing it's happening. Your brain makes assumptions about where you are and where you're going, and those assumptions can be completely wrong without any obvious warning signs. You think you're following the trail, but you're actually following some other path that's leading you away from where you intend to go, and by the time you realize something is wrong, you're already thoroughly lost. Roughly 90 minutes into the afternoon portion of my hike, I began experiencing an uncomfortable sensation that something was not quite right. Though I couldn't immediately identify what was triggering this feeling, it was just a vague sense of unease, an intuition that things were not as they should be. The trail seemed considerably less defined than it had been during the morning hours, more like a faint path through the forest than a well-maintained hiking trail. The understory vegetation was pressing in more closely on both sides. I was no longer encountering the white blazes that had been my constant navigational companions since the trailhead. At first, I told myself that I had probably just missed a few blazes, that they would start appearing again soon. But after another 15 minutes of walking without seeing any markers at all, concern began growing into genuine worry. I halted my progress and extracted my map and compass from my pack, attempting to determine my precise location. The compass indicated I was traveling southeast, which was approximately correct according to my understanding. However, when I examined the terrain features surrounding me and attempted to correlate them with the contour lines represented on my topographical map, nothing aligned properly. The prominent ridge to my right should have been positioned to my left based on my interpretation of the map. Or perhaps I was misreading the symbols and elevations. I rotated the map through various orientations, experimenting with different possibilities, but I could not make the landscape match what the map was telling me it should be. The fundamental problem was that every direction looked essentially identical. Thick forest, dominated by deciduous trees with an understory of mountain laurel and rhododendron. undulating terrain covered in decades worth of fallen leaves and an absence of any distinctive features I could definitively identify on my map. Every ridge looked fundamentally similar. Every hollow looked the same. I attempted to backtrack along my route, but after approximately 30 minutes of walking back toward where I thought I had come from, nothing triggered any recognition. Had I actually passed this way earlier, or was I simply compounding my disorientation? The intelligent course of action would have been to stop immediately at that location, establish a camp, and activate my emergency satellite communicator to request assistance. I possessed a rescue beacon. I had emergency provisions. I should have acknowledged that I was lost and sought help without delay, but pride and embarrassment prevented me from making that rational choice. I had informed all my friends and colleagues that I was an expert wilderness traveler. I had spoken confidently about my orienteering abilities and wilderness experience. How could I possibly trigger a rescue operation barely 48 hours into my planned adventure? I convinced myself that I could solve this problem through determination and careful analysis. I believed that if I simply maintained what I calculated to be the correct general direction, I would inevitably intersect the marked trail again. I continued walking for another 4 hours as the sun descended progressively lower toward the western horizon. My confidence was evaporating rapidly, and genuine fear was beginning to take hold. The terrain was becoming increasingly difficult, with steeper slopes and denser vegetation that tore at my exposed skin and caught on my clothing. My leg muscles were burning from the constant exertion of climbing up and sliding down through areas where no trail existed. Sweat was soaking through my shirt, despite the fact that the air temperature was dropping as evening approached. The sun was creating elongated shadows that stretched between the trees, and I estimated I had perhaps 90 minutes of useful daylight remaining. I needed to locate a suitable place to establish camp very soon. I checked my cell phone, even though I knew it was futile. No signal, naturally. I was situated in an extremely remote area with massive mountains blocking any possible connection to distant cell towers. I removed my satellite communicator from my pack, the single piece of technology I had brought specifically for scenarios exactly like this. This undeniably qualified as an emergency. I was lost. Darkness was approaching, and I possessed no knowledge of which direction would lead me back to safety. I activated the satellite communicator and waited while it searched for connection with orbiting satellites. But before I could compose an emergency message, I heard a sound that triggered primal terror in my nervous system. It was a low, rumbling growl emanating from somewhere off to my right. Not the sound a black bear makes, and not the sound of a domestic dog. Something different, something that activated every evolutionary survival instinct buried deep in my genetic code. I became absolutely motionless, holding my breath. With excruciating slowness, I rotated my head toward the source of that threatening sound. Approximately 60 yards away, partially concealed behind thick rhododendron bushes and the massive trunk of a fallen oak tree, I saw it. A mountain lion. The large feline was staring directly at me with those emotionless, predatory eyes that evaluate you as nothing more than potential food. Its sandy-colored fur blended seamlessly with the shadowy forest floor. Its long tail was moving slowly from side to side. Its powerful muscles were visibly tensed, prepared to explode into action. Every survival mechanism I possessed activated simultaneously. My heart began pounding with such force I was certain the mountain lion could detect it. Waves of cold fear washed through my body. I knew the protocols for mountain lion encounters. I had studied them, viewed educational videos, completed wilderness safety certification courses. Never run. Running triggers their predatory instincts. Make yourself appear larger. Extend your arms above your head. Speak in a loud voice. Retreat slowly while maintaining constant visual contact. Never present your back to a mountain lion. I knew these rules. Do not run. Make yourself big. Back away gradually. I raised both arms above my head and began moving backward, keeping my eyes locked on the mountain lion. The mountain lion advanced several steps, matching my retreat. My heart was hammering so violently I could feel the pulse in my neck. I shouted at the mountain lion, attempting to project aggression and confidence, but my voice emerged shaky and unconvincing. The mountain lion paused and continued observing me. For a brief moment, I harbored hope that perhaps it would decide I was not worth the effort and simply disappear into the forest. But then the mountain lion resumed moving, circling gradually toward my left side. The mountain lion was attempting to position itself behind me. I continued rotating to face the mountain lion, still backing away, but I was rapidly running out of maneuvering space. Behind me, the terrain dropped away sharply into a steep gully filled with boulders and deadfall. I could hear water running at the bottom. If I went over that edge while trying to escape, I would probably break bones or worse. But if I stopped retreating, the mountain lion would continue closing the distance. I was trapped with no good options. The mountain lion was now approximately 40 yards away and still advancing with that characteristic feline stalking movement, body low to the ground, each paw placed with absolute precision and silence. I could see the powerful muscles rippling beneath its coat with each deliberate step. I could see its eyes locked on me with that unnerving predatory focus. I realized with absolute clarity that this animal intended to kill me. This was not a bluff charge or a warning. This was a predator that had identified prey and committed to the hunt. I grabbed my water bottle from the side pocket of my pack and hurled it at the mountain lion with all the force I could generate. The bottle sailed through the air and struck a tree trunk several feet from the mountain lion, making a loud crack that echoed through the forest. The mountain lion flinched slightly but did not retreat. Instead, it dropped even lower, haunches gathering, preparing to spring. I fumbled for anything else I could throw. My hand found a rock about the size of a baseball, and I threw it, but my aim was terrible. The rock sailed wide and crashed into the underbrush. The mountain lion did not even react this time. It took 3 more steps forward, 30 yards now. I could see its whiskers twitching. I could see the muscles in its back legs coiling like springs. In seconds, it would launch itself at me, and there would be nothing I could do to stop it. I had no weapon. I had no defense. I was about to die in these mountains, and no one would find my body for weeks, maybe months, maybe never. I opened my mouth to scream, though I had no idea what good that would do. But before any sound could emerge from my throat, something else happened. Another sound filled the forest, a roar, but not from the mountain lion. This roar came from somewhere behind me and to my right, from deeper in the forest. It was the most powerful, terrifying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. It was deep and resonant, vibrating through the air and seemingly through the ground itself. It was loud enough that I felt it in my chest, in my bones. It was a sound that spoke of immense size and overwhelming power. It was a sound that no animal I could identify should be able to produce. The mountain lion's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Its head whipped around toward the source of that incredible roar, its ears flattened against its skull. For the first time since this nightmare encounter began, I saw something other than predatory confidence in the mountain lion's posture. I saw fear. The roar came again, even louder this time, and with it came the sound of something very large moving through the forest. Not trying to be quiet, not attempting stealth, just crashing through underbrush and snapping branches with a force that suggested massive weight and complete disregard for obstacles. The mountain lion made a decision. It turned away from me and bounded off into the forest, moving with incredible speed and agility, disappearing into the darkening woods within seconds. I stood there shaking violently, unable to process what had just happened. The mountain lion was gone. Something had scared it away. But what? And was I now in even greater danger? I slowly turned toward where that massive roar had originated. The crashing sounds had stopped. The forest was silent except for my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Shadows were deep between the trees as the sun continued its descent. I could barely see anything beyond 30 or 40 feet. Then I saw movement. Something was approaching through the trees. Something tall, something walking upright. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It had to be a person, someone else hiking out here who had scared away the mountain lion. That was the only rational explanation. But as the figure emerged more clearly from the shadows, I realized it was not a person. It was too large. Much too large. This thing stood at least 8 feet tall, possibly taller. Its body was covered entirely in dark, reddish-brown fur. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, wider than any human's could be. Its arms were long and heavily muscled, hanging down past where a human's knees would be. Its chest was massive and barrel-shaped. Its legs were thick and powerful. And its face. I could see its face as it stepped into a shaft of fading sunlight. It had a flat nose, a pronounced brow ridge, and dark eyes that looked at me with unmistakable intelligence. This was Sasquatch. This was Bigfoot. This creature that I had always dismissed as folklore and wishful thinking and misidentification. This impossible being was standing right in front of me, less than 20 feet away, close enough that I could see the rise and fall of its massive chest as it breathed. Close enough that I could smell it, a musky animal scent mixed with something like wet earth and crushed vegetation. My legs gave out. I simply collapsed onto my knees, unable to support my own weight any longer. My mind could not integrate what I was experiencing. This could not be real. This creature did not exist. But I was looking at it. It was there. Solid and undeniable and absolutely real. The Sasquatch took a step toward me. I should have been terrified. I should have been scrambling to escape, but I had no energy left. I had nothing left. I just knelt there in the dirt and leaves, staring up at this impossible creature, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. The Sasquatch stopped about 10 feet away from where I knelt. It was studying me, those dark, intelligent eyes examining me with what seemed like curiosity. Its head tilted slightly to one side. Its expression was not threatening. It was not showing teeth or making aggressive gestures. It was just watching me, as if trying to understand what I was and what I was doing in this remote place. I found my voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I don't even remember what I said. Something incoherent. Maybe I was begging. Maybe I was praying. Maybe I was just making sounds because the silence was too overwhelming. The Sasquatch made a sound in response. Not a roar this time. Something softer, a low rumbling that came from deep in its chest. It sounded almost questioning, almost concerned. The creature looked in the direction where the mountain lion had fled, then back at me. It seemed to understand that I had been in danger. It seemed to understand that I was vulnerable and lost and completely out of my depth. What happened next is something I replay in my mind constantly, analyzing every detail, trying to make sense of it. The Sasquatch crouched down, bringing its face closer to my level. The movement was careful, deliberate, as if it was trying not to frighten me further. Up close, I could see that its face was surprisingly expressive. Its eyes showed awareness, showed thought. This was not some mindless beast. This was a thinking being. The Sasquatch extended one massive hand toward me. The hand was enormous, fingers thick and powerful, covered in coarse hair, but the gesture was gentle. The hand came within inches of my face and then paused, waiting. I realized it was offering to help me up. I stared at that huge hand. Every rational thought in my brain was screaming at me that this situation was impossible. Every bit of education and scientific training I possessed insisted that Sasquatch did not exist, but the evidence was right in front of me, and I was lost in the wilderness at dusk with no idea how to find my way out and no energy left to try. I reached out with my own much smaller hand and placed it in the Sasquatch's palm. The creature's hand was warm. The skin was tough and calloused, similar to someone who worked extensively with their hands. The Sasquatch's fingers gently closed around my hand, and it pulled me to my feet with effortless strength, lifting me as if I weighed nothing at all. Once I was standing, the Sasquatch released my hand and gestured toward the forest, pointing in a specific direction. Then it looked back at me, clearly waiting to see if I understood. I had no idea what it was trying to communicate. Did it want me to go that way? Was it telling me where the mountain lion had gone? Was it indicating danger? The Sasquatch saw my confusion. It made that low rumbling sound again, then began walking in the direction it had pointed. After a few steps, it stopped and turned back to look at me. The message was clear: follow me. I glanced around at the darkening forest. I was hopelessly lost. Night was falling. A mountain lion was somewhere nearby. I had absolutely no idea which direction to go. And here was a creature that apparently knew these mountains intimately and had just saved my life. What choice did I have? I adjusted my backpack on my shoulders and began walking after the Sasquatch. The creature waited until I had caught up, then continued moving through the forest at a measured pace that I could match. It moved with remarkable grace for something so large, stepping over obstacles and ducking under low branches with the ease of someone who had traveled this terrain thousands of times. I followed as best I could, struggling to keep up, even though the Sasquatch was clearly moderating its pace for my benefit. We traveled like that for perhaps 30 minutes, moving through terrain that was completely unfamiliar to me. The Sasquatch would occasionally pause and look back to make sure I was still following, then continue onward. Several times it would gesture for me to be careful, pointing out hazardous spots where the ground was unstable or where thorny vegetation blocked the path. It was guiding me, actively protecting me. Eventually we reached a small creek, probably the same one I had heard running at the bottom of that ravine earlier. The Sasquatch led me to a relatively flat area beside the water where a large rock overhang created a natural shelter. The spot was perfect for camping, protected from wind and weather, with fresh water immediately available and a small clearing where I could set up my tent. The Sasquatch pointed to the sheltered area, then looked at me. I understood. This was where I should stay for the night. I nodded to show I understood and began removing my backpack. The Sasquatch watched as I pulled out my tent and began the process of setting it up. My hands were shaking so badly from adrenaline and exhaustion that I kept fumbling with the poles and stakes. The Sasquatch remained nearby, occasionally looking around at the surrounding forest as if keeping watch. After I finally managed to get my tent erected, I sat down heavily on a log near the creek. I was physically and emotionally drained. I pulled out my water pump and began filtering water from the creek into my bottles. I needed to drink something. I needed to eat something. I needed to process what was happening. The Sasquatch had moved to a position about 20 feet away, where it could observe both me and the approaches to this campsite. It sat down on the ground, settling its massive frame against the trunk of a large tree. Its eyes continued to scan the forest, alert and watchful. I realized with a shock that it was standing guard. It was protecting me. I managed to prepare a simple meal, just adding hot water to a freeze-dried dinner. My small camp stove seemed absurdly inadequate and modern compared to everything else happening. I ate mechanically, barely tasting the food while watching the Sasquatch. The creature did not move from its position. As full darkness fell and I prepared to retreat into my tent, the Sasquatch was still there, a massive silhouette barely visible against the darker shadows of the forest. I crawled into my sleeping bag feeling safer than I had any right to feel. There was a Sasquatch sitting outside my tent, This should have been the most terrifying night of my life. Instead, I felt protected. I felt like something ancient and powerful had decided I was worth saving. I slept fitfully, waking multiple times throughout the night. Each time I woke, I would listen intently. Sometimes I could hear the Sasquatch moving around outside, the rustle of vegetation or the crack of a twig. Once I heard that low rumbling sound the creature made, though it seemed directed at something in the forest rather than at me. The Sasquatch was still keeping watch. When dawn finally arrived and grey light began filtering through my tent, I emerged to find the Sasquatch still present, though it had moved to a different position. The creature looked at me as I crawled out of my tent, and I could swear I saw something like relief in its expression. I began breaking down my camp, packing everything back into my backpack. I had no idea what would happen next. Would the Sasquatch simply leave now that I had survived the night? Or did it have some further plan? As if reading my thoughts, the Sasquatch stood up to its full impressive height and began walking toward another part of the forest. It looked back at me with clear expectation. We were moving on. I followed the Sasquatch for most of that day. The creature led me through terrain I never would have navigated successfully on my own, taking routes that avoided steep climbs and dense undergrowth, always seeming to know exactly where it was going. We crossed ridges and descended into valleys. We followed animal trails that I would never have noticed on my own. The Sasquatch never moved faster than I could manage, frequently stopping to allow me to catch my breath and drink water. Several hours into our journey, the Sasquatch suddenly stopped and held up one massive hand in a clear gesture to halt and be silent. I froze immediately. The creature's head turned slowly, scanning the area ahead of us. Its nostrils flared as it sampled the air. Then I heard what had alerted it. Movement through the underbrush, something large approaching our position. My heart rate spiked. Was it the mountain lion again, or something else? The Sasquatch moved to position itself between me and whatever was approaching. Its posture shifted subtly, becoming more aggressive, more threatening. A low growl began building in its chest, similar to the roar I had heard the previous evening, but more controlled, more focused. Whatever was approaching apparently decided discretion was the better choice. The sounds of movement veered away from us, heading off in a different direction. The Sasquatch maintained its alert stance for several more minutes before finally relaxing. It looked back at me, and I saw something in its eyes that might have been satisfaction. Threat eliminated. We were safe to continue. We traveled for several more hours. I was exhausted. My legs were screaming in protest. My feet were covered in blisters. But I kept moving. The Sasquatch was leading me somewhere specific. I trusted it completely at this point. What choice did I have? Late in the afternoon, we crested a ridge, and I saw something that made me almost cry with relief. In the distance, perhaps a mile away, I could see a clearing with several structures, a ranger station, civilization, rescue. The Sasquatch stopped at the edge of the tree line and pointed toward the ranger station. Then it looked at me. I understood. This was where we parted ways. It had led me to safety. Its job was done. I turned to face the Sasquatch fully, trying to find words adequate to express what I was feeling. Thank you seemed completely insufficient for a creature that had saved my life and guided me through the wilderness for nearly 2 days. The Sasquatch seemed to understand my struggle. It reached out with one massive hand and very gently touched the top of my head, just for a moment. The gesture felt almost like a blessing. Then the creature stepped back and raised one hand in what looked unmistakably like a wave, a gesture of farewell. I raised my own hand in response, tears streaming down my face. The Sasquatch turned and began walking back into the forest. Within seconds, it had disappeared completely into the dense vegetation, as if it had never existed at all. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where the Sasquatch had vanished. Then I turned toward the ranger station and began making my way down the slope. By the time I reached the ranger station, I had constructed a story in my mind. I told the rangers I had gotten lost after taking a wrong turn on the trail. I told them I had spent 2 nights camping in the wilderness while trying to navigate back to civilization. I told them about the mountain lion encounter, but said I had managed to scare it away by yelling and throwing objects. They accepted this explanation without question. They were concerned about my condition, providing me with food and water and checking me over for injuries. They asked detailed questions about the mountain lion, wanting to know exactly where I had seen it and how it had behaved. I answered their questions as honestly as I could, while carefully omitting everything about the Sasquatch. I said I had eventually found my way by following water drainage patterns downstream until I spotted the ranger station. They seemed satisfied with this explanation. No one questioned why someone who claimed to be lost had managed to find her way to this specific location. I did not offer additional details. I spent considerable time afterward thinking about everything that had occurred. Part of me wanted desperately to return to those mountains and attempt to find the Sasquatch again. But I knew that would be wrong. The Sasquatch had revealed itself to me because I was in desperate need of help. The Sasquatch had shown mercy to someone in a life-threatening situation. Going back would be disrespectful, like attempting to exploit that generosity. The Sasquatch had released me. I needed to honor that decision. I also spent many hours contemplating why the Sasquatch had helped me. It would have been simple for the creature to simply remain hidden, or even easier to stay concealed and allow the mountain lion to finish what it had started. But the Sasquatch had intervened. The Sasquatch had driven away the mountain lion, and then invested many hours ensuring I reached safety. That kind of behavior suggests something far beyond mere animal instinct. It suggests genuine compassion. It suggests intelligence and moral reasoning. It suggests that Sasquatch creatures might possess more humanity than most people would ever believe possible. Sometimes during quiet moments, particularly at night, I lie in bed and replay the memory of the Sasquatch sitting against that tree, keeping watch while I slept in my tent. I remember those deep, intelligent eyes studying me with what seemed like concern. I remember the gentle touch on my head and the farewell gesture. I remember how the Sasquatch could have harmed me at any moment, but instead chose protection over violence. Those memories remain as vivid and clear today as they were when they occurred. They will never fade or diminish. I have since read numerous accounts of Sasquatch encounters. Some sound authentic, while others are obviously fabricated or embellished. But the stories that resonate as truthful always share certain common elements. They describe Sasquatch creatures as intelligent and frequently gentle. They describe beings that seem to comprehend human distress and sometimes respond with kindness rather than aggression. Those narratives match my personal experience perfectly. The Sasquatch that rescued me was not some mindless monster from horror films. It was a thinking, feeling being that made a conscious choice to help someone in desperate need. My experience in those mountains transformed me in ways I'm still discovering. I used to believe I understood the natural world comprehensively. I had studied biology, learned wilderness survival techniques, and spent countless hours hiking in remote areas. But I had been operating under the fundamental assumption that humans represented the apex of intelligence, the most capable and sophisticated creatures in any environment. Meeting the Sasquatch completely shattered that assumption. There are beings in this world that we do not understand. Beings that have learned to avoid human detection, that inhabit the remote places we rarely penetrate. Sasquatch is one of those beings. For many years, I dismissed all Sasquatch stories as myths or misidentified animals. Now, I possess direct knowledge of the truth. Sasquatch is real. Sasquatch exists out there, dwelling in the deep forests, probably observing us far more frequently than we realize. The implications of this reality are staggering when you really stop to think about them. If Sasquatch exists, what else might exist that we've dismissed as impossible or mythological? How much of our certainty about the natural world is built on incomplete information and hasty assumptions? I am also considerably more humble now regarding my position within nature. I used to venture into wilderness areas feeling confident, perhaps even arrogant about my capabilities. I thought my knowledge, my equipment, and my experience made me invulnerable to serious problems. But those 5 days taught me how rapidly circumstances can deteriorate and how vulnerable we truly are when stripped of our technology and infrastructure. All my education, all my preparation, all my fancy gear meant nothing when I made a simple navigation error and became disoriented. Without the Sasquatch, I would have died in those mountains. Either the mountain lion would have killed me, tearing into me with claws and teeth while I screamed and bled out on the forest floor, or I would have eventually succumbed to exposure and dehydration, growing progressively weaker and more disoriented until I simply lay down and never got up again. My body would have been found eventually, weeks or months later, probably reduced to scattered bones by scavengers. My death would have been ruled an unfortunate accident, a tragic reminder of how dangerous wilderness can be. No one would have ever known about the Sasquatch. I owe my continued existence to a creature that mainstream science insists does not exist. That fact forces me to question a lot of other things I thought I knew with certainty. I think about the Sasquatch constantly, sometimes multiple times per day. Sometimes I'll be teaching a biology class, explaining cellular respiration or ecological relationships, and my mind will drift to those enormous, intelligent eyes watching me from across the campsite. Sometimes I'll be lying in bed at night, listening to the normal sounds of suburban life outside my window, and I'll remember the sound of the Sasquatch moving through the forest, keeping watch while I slept. Sometimes I'll see something on the news about alleged Sasquatch sightings or footprints found somewhere, and I'll feel a strange mixture of emotions, knowing the truth, but unable to speak it publicly without being labeled as delusional or attention-seeking. Sometimes I wonder if the Sasquatch reflects on me the way I constantly think about it. Does the creature remember the exhausted female hiker it rescued from a mountain lion attack? Does it wonder what happened to me after we parted ways? Does it feel any curiosity about human life and human society? Or was I simply another brief encounter in a long life spent avoiding human contact, no more memorable than any of the thousands of deer or other animals it must see regularly? I would like to believe the Sasquatch remembers. I would like to think that night and the following day meant something to the creature as well, that there was some kind of connection between us that transcended species boundaries. But I will never have that answer. The Sasquatch is gone, living its life somewhere in those vast mountains, and I have no way to find it again even if I wanted to. And perhaps that is acceptable. Perhaps it's even better this way. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some encounters are meant to happen once and then live on only as memories. The Sasquatch gave me an incredible gift, not just my life, but a glimpse into a reality that most people will never experience. To go back and try to find it again would be greedy, would be disrespecting that gift. I have shared this story with only a select few individuals, and most of them regarded me as if I had lost my grip on reality. My best friend Sarah, the one I had given my itinerary to before the trip, listened to my account with growing skepticism. She was supportive and kind, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe the Sasquatch part. She thought I had experienced some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and fear and exhaustion. She suggested gently that perhaps I had seen a bear and my frightened mind had transformed it into something else. She meant well, and I don't blame her for her skepticism. My parents reacted similarly when I eventually told them. My mother was just relieved I was safe. My father, always the rational engineer, listened politely and then changed the subject. I could tell he thought I had embellished the story or misinterpreted what I'd seen. Again, I don't blame them. If someone had related this story to me before I lived through it myself, I would have been doubtful as well. The human mind wants the world to make sense, to fit into neat categories of possible and impossible. Sasquatch falls firmly into the impossible category for most people. I told one of my colleagues at school, another biology teacher I'd known for years, and his reaction was the most disappointing. He actually laughed, thinking I was joking. When he realized I was serious, he became concerned and suggested I might want to talk to someone, a counselor or therapist, about the trauma of being lost. The implication was clear. He thought I was having some kind of mental breakdown. After that, I stopped telling people. What was the point? I couldn't prove what had happened. I had no photographs, no physical evidence, no witnesses, just my word, and apparently my word wasn't enough. But I know what I experienced. I know what I saw. Every detail remains crystal clear in my memory, as vivid now as it was 5 years ago. The texture of the Sasquatch's fur when its hand brushed against mine, the intelligence in those eyes, the gentleness of its touch when it patted my head in farewell, the massive size of its form silhouetted against the trees, the musky scent that surrounded it, the rumbling sounds it made deep in its chest, all of it real, all of it undeniable, at least to me. And somewhere in those mountains, so does a Sasquatch. The Sasquatch knows it saved a lost hiker's life. The Sasquatch knows it showed mercy to someone who desperately required it. That knowledge is enough for me. I don't need validation from skeptics or recognition from the scientific community. The Sasquatch and I know the truth, and that's what matters. People frequently ask me whether I would return to those mountains. Friends who know the general story of my hiking trip, the sanitized version without the Sasquatch, sometimes suggest we should go back together, make new memories to replace the traumatic ones. The honest answer is that I remain uncertain. Part of me desperately wants to go back, to walk those ridges again, to camp beside that creek where the Sasquatch kept watch over me. I want to return to the spot where we parted ways, where it touched my head and waved goodbye before disappearing into the forest. I want to walk through those woods and perhaps catch another glimpse of the creature that saved my life, even if just from a distance. But another part of me believes that what happened was intended to be a singular event, a once-in-a-lifetime encounter that can never be repeated. The Sasquatch revealed itself to me in my moment of greatest vulnerability and need. It broke its normal pattern of avoiding human contact because the circumstances demanded intervention. Attempting to return would be like trying to recapture lightning in a bottle, chasing something that was only meant to happen once. It might even be disrespectful to the Sasquatch, like I was trying to exploit our encounter or turn it into some kind of tourist attraction in my mind. The Sasquatch helped me and then released me. Going back might violate the implicit agreement we seem to have, so I stay away. I look at maps of the Smoky Mountains sometimes, tracing the trails with my finger, identifying the areas where I might have been, but I don't go back. Maybe someday I will. Maybe when I'm older and have more perspective. Or maybe I never will, and that single encounter will remain the defining outdoor experience of my life, complete and perfect in its singularity. What I know with absolute certainty is that I will never forget those 5 days. I will never forget the terror of being stalked by a mountain lion, that primal fear of being hunted by something that could kill me. I will never forget the complete disorientation of being utterly lost, having no idea which direction would lead to safety. I will never forget the exhaustion, the panic, the desperation. And I will definitely never forget the moment when a massive, hair-covered creature stepped out of the forest and completely changed everything I thought I understood about the world. That moment is frozen in my memory with perfect clarity. The fading light filtering through the trees, the mountain lion disappearing into the shadows, the massive form emerging from the forest. those intelligent eyes studying me. That moment is when my entire worldview shifted, when the impossible became real, when myth transformed into flesh and blood and bone standing right in front of me. The Sasquatch saved my life, and I will carry gratitude for that until the day I die. Not a day goes by when I don't think about it and feel thankful that the creature chose to help me, instead of simply staying hidden. I owe it everything. I am sharing this account now because I believe it holds importance. Important for people to recognize that there are phenomena beyond our current understanding. Important for people to approach wilderness areas with respect and humility. And important for people to understand that sometimes when we find ourselves at our absolute lowest point, help can arrive from the most unexpected sources, even from a creature that supposedly does not exist. We live in an age where science and technology have given us the illusion that we understand everything, that we've mapped every corner of the earth and categorized every living species. We think we know exactly what exists and what doesn't exist. We're confident in our knowledge, sometimes arrogantly so. But my experience taught me that there are still mysteries in this world, still discoveries waiting to be made, still creatures living in remote places that have learned to avoid detection. The Sasquatch is one of those creatures. How many of them are there? I have no idea. Where exactly do they live? I don't know. How have they remained hidden for so long? I can only speculate. But I know they exist because I met one, I interacted with one, I was saved by one. That's not speculation or wishful thinking or misidentification, that's direct personal experience. I think about what would have happened if I had had my camera readily accessible when the Sasquatch first appeared. Would I have been able to capture a photograph? Would I have even thought to try, given how terrified and exhausted I was? Would photographic evidence have changed anything, or would skeptics simply insist it was a hoax or a man in a costume? Probably the latter. People believe what they want to believe, and most people have decided that Sasquatch doesn't exist. No amount of evidence would convince hardcore skeptics, so maybe it's better that I have no proof beyond my own memory and testimony. Maybe the lack of evidence keeps the encounter pure, keeps it from becoming a spectacle or a source of unwanted attention. The Sasquatch saved my life without any expectation of recognition or reward. It did so in private, away from cameras and witnesses. That seems appropriate somehow. I've also thought a lot about the ethical implications of my encounter. Should I report it to scientific authorities? Should I try to lead researchers back to where it happened, help them search for evidence? Part of me feels like I have a responsibility to science, to human knowledge, to report what I witnessed, but a larger part of me feels protective of the Sasquatch. These creatures have clearly gone to great lengths to avoid human contact. They've developed behaviors and patterns that allow them to exist in proximity to human civilization without being definitively documented. They've maintained their secrecy and privacy for centuries or longer. Who am I to violate that? Who am I to potentially expose them to harassment or harm from people who would want to capture them, study them, exploit them? The Sasquatch showed me mercy and kindness. The least I can do is respect its right to privacy and continue to live undisturbed. If scientists eventually gather enough evidence to prove Sasquatch existence, fine. But I won't be the one to set that process in motion. My encounter was a gift, not an opportunity for fame or scientific advancement. I teach biology to high school students, and sometimes I'm tempted to share my story with them. We cover topics like biodiversity, undiscovered species, and the limitations of scientific knowledge. My Sasquatch encounter would be the perfect example of how much we still don't know about the natural world. But I refrain from telling them. They're teenagers, still forming their worldviews and critical thinking skills. I don't want to confuse them or make them question legitimate science because their teacher is talking about Bigfoot encounters. So I stick to the curriculum, teach the established facts, and keep my personal experiences to myself. Maybe someday, after I retire, I'll write a book about what happened. Or maybe I never will. Maybe this account is as close as I'll ever come to telling the full story publicly. What I do know is that the experience fundamentally changed how I view the world. I'm more open to possibilities now, more willing to admit that I don't have all the answers. When students ask me definitively whether something exists or whether something is possible, I'm more likely now to respond with probably or based on current evidence rather than absolute certainty. Because I've learned that certainty can be shattered in an instant when reality presents you with something you were absolutely certain was impossible. The natural world is bigger, stranger, and more wonderful than most people ever realize. There are animals living in the depths of the ocean that look like creatures from alien planets. There are insects with life cycles so complex and bizarre they seem impossible. There are fungi that form networks spanning entire forests, communicating and sharing resources in ways we're only beginning to understand. The world is full of wonders and mysteries, and somewhere in the mountains of eastern Tennessee, somewhere in the deep forests where humans rarely venture, there lives a species of large, intelligent primate that has learned to coexist with humans by remaining hidden. That's not fantasy. That's not wishful thinking. That's reality, whether mainstream science accepts it or not. The Sasquatch could have simply avoided me entirely. No one would have known. No one would have questioned its decision. But the Sasquatch chose differently. The Sasquatch chose compassion. The Sasquatch chose to intervene. And because of that choice, I am alive today to share this story. I hope that wherever the Sasquatch is now, the creature understands how grateful I remain. I hope the Sasquatch knows that its kindness was not overlooked or unappreciated. To anyone reading this who intends to venture into remote wilderness areas, please exercise caution. Respect the wildlife. Respect the terrain. Bring appropriate equipment and inform others of your planned route and timeline. Do not make the same mistakes I made, but also maintain an open mind regarding possibilities. The world is considerably larger and stranger than we typically acknowledge. There are beings living in the deep forests that we have only begun to comprehend. And if you ever find yourself lost and desperate and afraid, and you detect something moving through the trees, do not automatically assume it represents danger. Sometimes the most fearsome appearing creatures possess the kindest hearts. Sometimes the monsters turn out to be saviors. I learned that lesson through direct experience. Kneeling in front of a Sasquatch, desperate for help, and the Sasquatch responded. The Sasquatch rescued me, and I will spend the remainder of my life wondering about its motivations. Perhaps the Sasquatch helped me because it recognized something in me worth preserving. Perhaps the Sasquatch was simply acting according to its fundamental nature. Perhaps there exists some kind of ancient understanding among intelligent beings to provide assistance during times of desperate need. I do not have answers. All I know with certainty is that when I needed it most desperately, a Sasquatch stepped out of legend and mythology and into my reality. The Sasquatch frightened away a mountain lion, led me to safety, protected me through dangerous hours, and guided me to rescue. The Sasquatch accomplished all of this without demanding anything in return. That is the story. That is what happened to me in the Smoky Mountains 5 years ago. Believe it or reject it as you see fit, I know the truth. And somewhere in those mountains, so does a Sasquatch. The Sasquatch knows it saved a lost hiker's life. The Sasquatch knows it showed mercy to someone who desperately required it. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Sasquatch is still out there helping other people who become lost and frightened in the wilderness. I hope this is true because the world needs more kindness like that, even from creatures we are not supposed to believe exist, especially from creatures we are not supposed to believe exist.